Hi everyone, and welcome to the 2019-2020 Kindergarten Assessment Training. This is Krista Hawker, the District Testing Coordinator for Eugene 4J. Thanks for being along with me as we try this new training online. And I'm sorry that you have to listen to my voice, and if I talk too loud or too quickly, feel free to decrease your volume or slow it down a little bit. All right, so let's get started. The first thing is that these training requirements are for all of our 4J public and charter schools. So you're already watching this video, so you've started the first part of the online training. Eventually you'll read the Kindergarten Assessment Manual, which will be linked in the Talent Ed course or attached to an email. There's a short Google quiz that I'll have you take at the end, and then you'll sign your kindergarten assurance form. In addition to the online training, we'll have an in-person training as well. I have two options set up. One is on Thursday, August 29th in the auditorium at South Eugene High School immediately following the welcome back. I don't anticipate that this will take any more than 30 minutes, and it'll be a time where you can ask me questions that you had from this video. The second option is Friday, September 13th during the early release time. I'm going to coordinate with people who couldn't make it on the 29th and figure out a location for that a little bit later. Some logistics that you should know. Materials will be distributed either on September 9th for those who attended the in-person training on August 29th or during the in-person training on September 13th. We won't be starting any kindergarten assessments until September 11th, which is why the materials will be handed out a bit later. We also have a new method for data entry, which I'm hoping will improve the process for everyone. By September 11th, I will share a Google Sheet with your school, and that'll include all of your EAs, your school testing coordinator, and it'll be live, so that way I can help you troubleshoot as you go. The new expectation, though, is that you're going to enter scores on a device as you test students, instead of waiting until the very end to enter those scores from the paper sheets. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. As you know, the Oregon Kindergarten Assessment is a requirement of all districts in the state, and all students are required to participate. So this includes students with disabilities, English language learners, and there aren't any opt-outs or exemptions. It's designed to measure what students can know and do upon entering kindergarten, and it's not about what they have learned in kindergarten. New this year is a kindergarten assessment manual. Rather than having you look in several different places for information about the KA, it's all in one. It'll include information about administration and the accessibility supports. The purpose of the kindergarten assessment is really to provide local and statewide information for schools, families, communities, and policymakers. It's a snapshot. We know that it's not a comprehensive understanding of what students can know and do now or throughout kindergarten, and it's a way for the state to determine systemic opportunity gaps and to allocate early learning resources. Here's a little graphic about what the kindergarten assessment is and isn't. We know it's a snapshot of early English literacy, early math, and approaches to learning. It's a consistent statewide tool, and it's required by Oregon law. The kindergarten assessment should not be used as a barrier to entry for kindergarten. It should not be a way to place children in specific programs or classrooms, and we know it's not a comprehensive assessment of students' knowledge and skills. We'll look at the different modules here. You're already going to go through the training and the review materials and these sorts of things, and many of the ordering and distributing I'll take care of. All right, so as you can see, we have a variety of training requirements. This video will take care of most of it. You'll just need to read the kindergarten manual, which I will link for you. Here are some Eugene-specific timelines and dates. The kindergarten testing window begins on September 11th and will run until October 17th. The early math and early literacy need to happen within the first 3 weeks of the window, so September 11th to October 2nd, and approaches to learning needs to happen at the last 3 weeks. Our collection window will run from the start of testing through October 18th, and our new system will allow for data entry as you go. As I mentioned, the testing window begins on September 11th, and you'll have kind of the direct measures the first 3 weeks and approaches to learning during the last 3 weeks. Nothing has changed for the kindergarten assessment in terms of the different tests, so you still have early literacy, early math, and approaches to learning. The 2019 and 2020 materials look very similar. The teacher manuals or the assessor manuals are still in green with student in yellow. You'll have enough assessor booklets for all of the teachers in your building, and you'll have a handful of student booklets since they won't be writing in them. We'll still have the scorecards on paper for the students, and that will eventually be transferred to the spreadsheet. Let's look at accessibility. The purpose of accessibility supports is to give equitable access to all students. We can only use the approved supports in the Kindergarten Accessibility Manual, or the CAM, and we don't want to do anything that will compromise the construct of the assessments. We're not making changes to it, and we're not changing the way that students are responding or assessed. We're just helping students have equitable access. The accessibility supports are found in the CAM. You'll look at universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations, and we just want to make sure that we're grouping together as general ed teachers, English language learners, special education teachers, and other district staff to decide what's best for students. Similar to what you've seen before, there are 3 different types of support. Universal tools are available to all students. Designated supports, where most of those language supports live, are based on student need, and accommodations are for students who are on an IEP or a 504 plan only. When you're thinking about documenting accessibility supports, the first thing that you would want to do is look at the statewide assessment section of the IEP or 504 plan if that exists. You might also look at the kindergarten entry survey to get more information about home language, and then just talk with the other staff in your building to get more information about the student. Here are some of your responsibilities as a TA. I sound like a broken record, but you're going to continue to look at the CAM, the Kindergarten Assessment Manual, for the supports. You'll look at the Individualized Education Plan 504 or cumulative file. And what we don't want to do is give a student a support that's not based on need, or give the same designated support to everyone. The only tools where we can do that are the universal tools. It really needs to be individualized. Here are some questions to consider as you're thinking about accessibility supports. Again, it's early enough in the year that students might not be formally designated English language learners, so we'd want to make sure that we're using that home survey to decide if students need language supports. And then obviously talking with our special education staff if we have students identified with disabilities. ODE has given some guidance about how to go through administering accessibility supports. So the very first thing we want to do is expect participation. We want to assume that every single student is going to take the assessment, and we need to be careful because even if it's written into an IEP that a student isn't taking standardized assessments, that's actually incorrect, as the kindergarten assessment requires 100% participation. After that, we'd want to learn about the accessibility supports from the manual, select the appropriate ones as a team, administer them according to the manual's guidelines, and then, as always, if you have suggestions about what's missing for our students or what ODE should consider, please pass those along, and I'm happy to direct it to the appropriate person. Test security is mostly about the student responses, and this is what you will sign when you look at the assessment assurance form. We want to make sure that we're following the guidelines, but the good news is that until the student takes the test, the materials actually aren't secure. The assurance form looks very similar this year. I will link this to you and also have paper copies available during the in-person check-in for you to sign. As I mentioned before, the only thing that's secure about the kindergarten assessment are the completed score sheets and any materials that contain a student's name or information. So if you need to make copies of the assessor booklet or the student booklet or score sheets or anything like that, those are all non-secure, and it's fine for you to make copies of those if you run out. Test improprieties should be reported first to the school testing coordinator, and then that person will report to me, the district testing coordinator. Some examples might be going off of script. Another student could be in the room while you're testing. One kindergartner providing feedback. One thing to keep in mind is that we shouldn't be testing our family members. So if you are a kindergarten teacher or EA and you are related to someone in your class, we'd want to have that student tested by someone else. ODE provides a parent brochure in English and Spanish. If you'd like to get that from their website and provide it to your families, it'll give a little bit more information about the kindergarten assessment. And now we'll take a look at the first two measures, early literacy and early math. Before students arrive, you're going to want to review the manual, go through this training, gather student information, and look to see if you have any students on IEPs or 504s. The early literacy and early math haven't changed, so you'll still see the same sections with letter name recognition, letter sound, and then the different math options there. The materials look the same, green and yellow. And here's an example of the required information that you'll need for each student. Even though we eventually put this information into a spreadsheet, we are required to keep paper copies, and that can either be at the school or at the district office. It's important that we know the student name, district, school, SSID, whether or not they're a special education student or an English language learner, and their home language. And then the gray box in the middle is a way for you to provide documentation of accessibility supports, as well as the person who gave the assessment. Okay, let's take a look at these attempt codes. Pretty much every time you test a student, they are going to get a test attempt of yes, meaning that they were given an opportunity to test. If for some reason the student was never tested because they were absent, or maybe we forgot about them, I doubt that would happen, but then that would be a test code of N. So the vast majority of your students are going to have an admin code of 0, meaning that there weren't any special circumstances. Occasionally, and I know this does happen, a student will refuse the whole test, in which case you would have given them an opportunity, test code Y, but they refused to take it, so then you would give them an admin code of C. It's very unlikely that we would use 3, 4, or 7 for the administrative code, because a 3 means that we've changed the test somehow, which we shouldn't do, and we have very few invalidations by ODE. If a student was never given the opportunity to test, that means that we were never even presented the student with the papers. It could be because they were absent, not enrolled, a medical emergency, or potentially a repeat kindergartner. This just continues to go through and explain a few more details about these admin codes. The majority of your students are going to have that admin code of 0, especially if they were given a chance to take the test. And again, you can see more detail about the administration codes for no. Here are some ODE recommendations for best practices. We're really hoping that this year, with students not being tested until September 11th, you'll have even more of a relationship with those students and they'll feel more comfortable as they go through the test. And we'll take now a look at early literacy. The test continues to measure their literacy in English. So you will see that they're direct and untimed assessments looking at letter name recognition for upper and lowercase. They'll have 2 different 26-item grids, and they have approximately 5 seconds between each letter. It is untimed, so the 5 seconds are just a guideline, and students can have as much time as they need for processing. Spanish instructions are provided as a designated support. Here's a few more details about the letter name recognition. You're going to read the directions verbatim without providing feedback, except for those listed in italics. And then you'll see various icons to let you know when you need to look at the materials, say something out loud, or point for the student. Scoring for letter name recognition is the same. If it's correct, leave it blank. If they self-correct, you can just put SC above it. And if they say the incorrect letter name or do not respond, put a slash through it. On the scoring sheet, you'll give an attempt code of yes or no with the admin code that applies, the number of correct letters, and the date that the measure was given. Here's an example of a scoring sheet. This student had 2 incorrect letters, had one that was incorrect, but they self-corrected, and so this one counts as correct. So you'll see that they earned a 24 out of 26. They had no special circumstances, so they have an admin code of 0, and the test was given on September 6th. For letter name recognition, some additional considerations. You can move a student on after 5 seconds. You can ask them to tell you the names of any letters in the chart. You can remind them that they need to say the name of the letter if they're giving you the sound, and you can remind them that it needs to be in English. For letter sound recognition, again, it's direct and untimed. They'll have one 26-item grid with an upper and lowercase letter together, and they're going to identify as many sounds as they can. The 5 seconds between each letter is just suggested. The scoring for letter sounds will be the same. Slashes for incorrect sounds or no sound. Self-correcting will be marked with an SC, and correct is blank. Some considerations for letter sound. It's correct if a student says a long or short vowel sound. It is correct if a student says a hard or soft consonant sound for C or G. And it's correct if a student has a speech disorder but demonstrates knowledge of the sound. As before, you'll list the attempt and admin code, the number of correct letters, and the date that the test was administered. Here's a sample scoring guide for letter sound. You'll see that this student had 4 incorrect sounds and one that they self-corrected. So the self-correct counts as correct, so they have 22 out of 26. Some additional considerations as before. You can move them on after 5 seconds. If they're struggling with the first row, you can ask them to look at all of them in the chart. You can remind them that you want the sound of the letter and that it needs to be in English. ODE provides interpretive guidance for early literacy. You can see state averages, and you can see where students fall along the developing, approaching, and demonstrating and above scale. Moving on to early math, you'll see that this hasn't changed. The student booklet has 1 item per page with 2 sample items. It's not timed, but you can plan on 6 to 9 minutes, and there are Spanish instructions. All of the instructions are in the assessor booklet. You should read the instructions verbatim, and you can give students feedback based on effort. The scoring should look the same, with the gray options representing the correct response. There are 3 possible answers under the columns, and you'll circle the ones that the student said. Only use code N if there is no response or the response isn't listed. You'll see that at the top here is an opportunity to list the code for attempt and administration and then the date. Early math scoring is the only, or for early math, it's the only test where we can accept verbal or pointed responses. If they verbalize and don't point, that's fine. If they verbalize and point to something different, we prompt the student 1 time to point their final answer. And we can accept answers that are not in English, so long as the test administrator is familiar with the student's home language. I was really hoping this year that we'd have interpretive guidance for early math, but it appears that ODE does not have that ready. So as soon as they do, I will pass it along. And a few brief phrases that you can use for encouragement. They're there in English. You can also see them in Spanish, and they can also be translated into any other language if necessary. Here are just a few summary statements for the supports and expectations of the kindergarten assessment. All kindergarten students are expected to participate in the KA. This includes if students are on an IEP, a 504, or are English language learners. I also want to remind you that for now, early literacy continues to be a measure of English literacy, and that the letter sounds must be vocalized, not signed, to count as correct. I know that it might be frustrating because we have several students who could demonstrate literacy in their home language, but maybe at this time are not able to do so in English, and I will continue to pass along that feedback to ODE. The Kindergarten Assessment Manual has a comprehensive list of accessibility supports, and this year, further guidance for our deaf and hard of hearing students. Some data entry details for 4J. A Google Sheet will be shared with your kindergarten teachers, EAs, principals, and the STC on or before September 11th. We hope that you'll use a device in your classroom, such as a laptop or iPad, to enter the scores from the paper scoring sheet to the Google Sheet as you go. I know that it might slow down your testing a bit, but we're hoping to avoid the hours of data entry that happen at the end and hope that this will be a quick way to do it per student. All data must be entered by October 18th, and as we know that rosters will change, I will update those at least 3 times per week. The last module is for our school testing coordinators and our kindergarten teachers about approaches to learning. This must be done over a period of time, which is why the approaches to learning happens within the last 3 weeks of the testing window, and it must be completed by the classroom teacher. It includes 15 items to measure self-regulation and interpersonal skills. You can assess all of your students at one time looking at one item, or you could rate each of your students on all 15 before moving on to the next student. It's completely up to you. ODE asks you to consider the child's cultural background and that very seldom will children never exhibit a particular behavior. The scoring is on a 1 to 5 point scale from never exhibits to always exhibits. Sorry that my dog is barking in the background. The majority of your students will have a valid attempt code of Y and an admin code of 0. If you have any students that don't have a code of Y0, you can see the different codes at the top of the score sheet. Here's what that scoring guide will look like. On the upper left part of the scoring guide, you can see the school name, teacher name, and admin date. And in the upper right, you can see the different codes that are available to you. There's not a particular space to list the attempt codes, so what I would recommend is that the default is Y0, and any student that has a different code, you could list it in the margin. For example, if you had a student who was not evaluated because they were frequently absent, you could write an N1 in the margin. ODE provides some guidance here about observation, noting that during an average school day, teachers have 1,500 interactions with children, which makes it impossible to rely on memory alone. You are encouraged to record information in a systematic way, such as note-taking, to ensure an accurate assessment. So we're going to do 2 quick practice questions. The first one. When presented with a new math counting problem, Ken pushed away from his workspace, stomped his feet, and said, "This doesn't make any sense." This example could be used as evidence for item number 4, attempts new challenging tasks. And because Ken rarely attempts problems when confronted with new challenging tasks, the teacher would give a score of 2. Here's another example. Maria was working on building a tower out of blocks when another student came over and grabbed one. Maria said, "Wait, I was using that. If you want to play, I can share some of the other blocks with you." Over the course of 3 weeks, Maria frequently or usually shares toys or materials with other students without making a fuss. For indicator number 11, Maria's teacher frequently or usually shares her toys. So her teacher gave her a 4 for this indicator. As with early literacy, we have interpretive guidance for the approaches to learning. You can see the state average and then the scale between developing to approaching to demonstrating and above. And we're done. So what I would encourage you to do is save any questions about test administration or logistics for the in-person training, either on August 29th or September 13th. And I would love it if you could email me feedback about the new format for training, especially constructive comments about how to improve. My email address is there, and my phone extension is 7577.